everybody. Welcome to our review of Michael Row the Boat Ashore, as well as the introduction of our new song. Now with Michael, last week we went over the fact that we could take songs that we have worked through previously and retool them in a way such to make them a little bit more challenging for a second go around. Well, here we literally put our money where our mouth is, because if you've been part of the Keys to Fun program, you know that Michael Row the Boat Ashore is in the first 5 weeks of our lesson program. So why would we go back to one of those songs? Well, to prove to you that that is exactly something that you can literally do. You can take some of the songs that we started with, that started out being played in a very elementary way, and allow you now to go through them again with a little bit more knowledge that you have at this point and gain from them new difficulties, new points of practice is probably a better way to put it. Now, as we look at Michael, there are some differences between the copy that you received originally and the copy that is much more recently in your inbox here. For one, both songs are in different keys. Now, it is the same song, maybe I should say it that way. The same song printed in 2 different keys. Now, talking about keys is a little bit tricky, because I know that there are many of you that have instruments that can what we call transpose. That essentially means that you can put your instrument into whatever quote-unquote key that you'd like. Now, Lowrey and Yamaha have tackled this from 2 different perspectives, because there can be some confusion that lies in talking about a song that, a key rather, that a song is in, because the song is in a particular key, and your instrument itself can be pitched to a particular key on its own. Now, when you're looking at your sheet music, the key that your song is in, never changes. If you're looking at Michael Row the Boat Ashore and it's the original copy, it's in the key of G. Whether you have a button or a feature on your instrument that says transpose or not, does not change the fact that that song is physically printed, at least that rendition anyhow, is physically printed in G. What it does mean is that you can make it sound like it's printed in another key. Not that it is printed in another key, but simply that you can make it sound as if it's printed in another key. And there's a large distinction to be made there. And I feel as if the distinction is muddied a bit with the way that Lowrey does this. I tend not to try to be too heavy-handed in my criticisms of the instruments. Obviously, we have instruments here for purchase, and I'm pretty, I don't want to say very, very difficult with our suppliers of our instruments, but we pick and choose is probably a good way to put it. The instruments that we use in our program, the instruments that we have for purchase here, were by design. It wasn't just a haphazard, oh, we'll grab this, we'll grab that. There was a process by which different companies were weeded out, and then we basically applied to become purveyors of the equipment that we have, kind of crossing our fingers because we really like them. So I'm very hard-pressed to say a lot of negative things about any of the instruments that we have here, because I could say a ton of negative things about instruments, but that's why we don't carry many of those other brands. Having said all of that, one thing that has always been a little bit difficult with Lowrey, and Yamaha took this from another angle, which makes complete sense to me. We just said that a song can be printed in one key. For example, your first Michael Row the Boat Ashore is printed in the key of G, and that does not change unless you find another copy. Okay, well, let's just, laser beam on that copy for just a moment. Mine's in the key of G. When you go into your transposer on a Lowrey, what you're going to see is the letter C. Now, when we see the letter C, what that means is that a C key is going to sound like a C key. a D will sound like a D, an E will sound like an E, and F will sound like an F, so on and so forth. Let's say that we wanted a C key to sound like an A. So I want the sound of the A coming from the key that I visually identify as C. Well, what I would do is I would transpose or go up or down, depending upon how you'd like it to sound, so that the screen said A. Now that means that a C sounds like an A on a Lowry. And every key thereafter will change as a result of that. Does that mean that your song is now in the key of A? No. Your song is still in the key of G. Okay? Is it going to sound as if it's in the key of G any longer? It is not. It's going to sound like it's in another key, because now your C sounds like an A. Is this confusing? Probably. What Yamaha did to account for this confusion is they used a number system, plus and minus by ones. So if I wanted to go to the key of C sharp, what I would do is I'd go to my transposer and I would transpose up, and what it would say is +1. That means every key that I play sounds like the one to the right of it, white or black. If I go +2, that means every key that I play is going to sound 2 keys above the key that I'm hitting. If I go +3, that's 3 keys above. Now again, this is white keys and black keys. Now, why did Yamaha do this? Well, they did this so that we can make a distinction between all of these letters. When you're always using letters, there's this confusion that can happen where someone says, okay, my instrument's in the key of F, my song's in the key of G, what's it going to sound like? Well, Yamaha just says, your song's in the key of G. Do you want it to sound higher or lower? How much higher or lower do you want it to sound? I want this note to sound as if it's 4 keys higher. So what you do is you go to transpose and you 1, 2, 3, 4. It's going to say +4 on the screen, and that key is going to sound 4 keys higher no matter where you are. So it's not based upon a letter breakdown, because the letter breakdown, agreeably, is confusing. So Yamaha just completely took that off the table by just using numbers. If I want it to sound like 3 keys down, I go -3. And that just takes that right off the table. Now, no matter how you were practicing the song this week, that is something that you wanted to do. You wanted to change the key by playing a different copy. We weren't doing anything with transposing. I went over all of that to say we're not using that this week. Some of you may be saying, I don't have anything like that to begin with. Fine, we were using it anyways, okay? But I did want to make a distinction between transposing using a button and doing what we did, which was physically changing the keys that we were playing. And we did that by playing a different rendition the second time. What my goal for you was this week, in its simplest form, black and white, was to play the copy that I gave you most recently first, and then to play the older copy second. The idea being that the older copy was going to sound much brighter than the newer copy because the notes were much higher on the lines and spaces. Now, this is an important thing to know. The fact of the matter is that you can find a copy of Michael Row the Boat Ashore probably in any key that you'd like. Now, are there advantages and disadvantages to certain keys? And the answer is, well, yes, okay. The advantage to some keys is that it's a little bit easier to play in that you're able to avoid sharps and flats. Both of these renditions happen not to have any sharps or flats. But had I started, for example, using the key of F sharp, let's say I found a copy that was in F sharp, I'd go from no sharps and flats to almost all sharps and flats. It's just going to sound a little bit higher, a little bit lower than this one, but still, it's going to be a lot trickier to play. Now, why would someone choose to play a trickier rendition? Well, they may not choose it themselves. It may be a singer that is causing them to have to play in that key. Remember, if you're playing the keys, it doesn't necessarily have so much to do with a range in terms of a key being higher and out of your range, or lower and out of your range in that manner, because they're just keys. That's not true with a singer. That's not true with a lot of wind-styled instruments, not only the human voice, but the trumpet and the trombone and the clarinet and the saxophone. The reason that there are so many of those brass instruments and those reed instruments is because not only do they all give you a slightly different sound, but sometimes really the only difference is the pitch range of the notes that they can play. You know, some can play from here to here, others can play from here to here, others can play from here to here. Well, you, playing on the keys, can pretty much play wherever you want. I mean, at least in an ideal sense. So the person playing the keys is not usually the one that chooses the key, ironically. It's usually someone where it makes more of a difference to them. They might say, oh, I can't sing it that high, or my instrument doesn't play that range. We got to bring it down a couple steps. Now, if you have a transposer, which some of you do, you play the same sheet music you already have. You just bring it down virtually by using that feature. That's the great thing about a transposer, is not only is your instrument never going to get out of tune, never going to fall out of tune, you can put it in whatever tune you want. Whereas if you're playing on a piano, you either need to be able to play that song in a variety of different keys, or you need to have the sheet music so as to allow you to play that song in a variety of different keys. Luckily for us, that's exactly what we ran into this week. We had 2 copies of Michael Row the Boat Ashore, one in the key of C, the other in the key of G. Luckily for us, as I said, the one in the key of G did not have any black keys in it. Now you might be saying to yourself, not so fast, no black keys in it, because I noticed when I did one of those things that you told me about the other day, and what I'm referencing is the double notes. 2 weeks ago, we spoke about how you can add extra fingers into the right hand. We spoke about the notes always needing to be a certain distance apart. But last week, I had said that was tricky for a lot of students. For one, it was confusing. Some thought I meant a whole octave. For others, their hand just wasn't able to stretch quite that far. They were finding that it was difficult arthritically, potentially. Many of our students have some arthritis in their hands these days. You might have found that you were looking down at the keys more than you wanted to, simply because you were using the same 2 fingers for all of the notes involved. And finally, the lowest note wasn't there. Well, a lot of that could be avoided with what I went over last week, which is you take the name of the chord, or the key rather, and you use that as the anchor. So you say, okay, the song's in the key of G, the G is my anchor. The song's in the key of C, the C is my anchor. And I had said last week that what you do is you take that key of C and you play the C with every single note except for 2 of them. I can't play the C with the C because it's the same key, obviously. And I want to try to avoid playing it with the D, because the D and the C are right next to each other, and that's not going to sound very good. So my suggestion was, every time you need to play a D, play the B instead. So we play the B with the D. We play the C with everything else. Okay? And I had said you can apply all of this same logic to the one that's in the key of G. Now, I did this purposefully. I try not to be mean with you here, but I did this because I wanted to see how many of you noticed it. And I was surprised to see how many of you actually did. One of the great things about teaching adults is that you don't take my word at face value. There may be some kids watching this, but most of my students are adults, by and large, and you test me. You don't just take what I say, you go home and you try it, which is great. It's just not rote. You say, okay, this is what he said. Let's have him put his money where his mouth is and see if this actually works the way that he said it does. And if it doesn't, you tell me, which is great. And I got a little of that this week. There were a few of you that came in playing the song in the key of G, and you said to me, I added that extra note like you said. But when I got to the key where I needed to go down, remember with the C I needed to go down to the B? When I went down, it didn't sound quite right. Well, let's take a look and see why that may have been. So I'm going to reposition the camera over the keys. We're going to tackle this one looking at the key of G, and we'll take a look to see why that may have sounded a little bit funny. Okay, so here we are with our bird's eye view. Now, I went over this originally with the copy that was in the key of C. And again, just to review this quickly, the idea was to allow you to play extra notes in the right hand, but not do what we did with Marianne. If you remember with Marianne, we had to keep a 4-note span in between our high note and our low note. Our high note was the one we needed to play. That was the one that was printed. Our low note was the one that we added in, so it sounded like this. Okay, which adds some nice harmony. But again, I mentioned some of the pitfalls of that harmony earlier, and I wanted to try to avoid that this week, but still give you the ability to try to add in a little bit of right-hand harmony if that was, so you're choosing. So what I had said was, you take the fact, again, that this is in the key of C. I'm looking at the most recent version here. This is the one that I did last week, the example I gave you. So we started out with the C, went up to the A, 6 notes, just like we had with Marianne. Now, we wanted to add that extra note, and I had said, we're looking at the C, and the C is going to be my anchor. Everything in the whole song revolves around the C. Now, technically, everything in the song revolves around the key of C. Not the physical key of C, but the scale of C. Okay? And that's going to become very important when I talk about the G. So I start out here with the C. That's got to be by itself, obviously. Okay? Every other note is going to, potentially, if you decide to do this, have a C added to it. So it'd be C and E, C and G, now we're going to do this all the way through until we get to the D, because I want to avoid this. Okay? So what I had said you can do is you can go down to the B. Every time that you have a D, you bring your thumb down to the B, and just for the D, the B becomes the anchor. Every other note is going to be a C. Okay, a little tricky there. Okay, with the background, you're going to go a little bit slower than that, obviously, so let's go ahead and bring a background in here. Okay, if you're going to play here, that's great. Just make sure, I'm talking on the easy 3 now, make sure that your split point is far enough. You want this to be a note and not a chord. So I'm going to go to my split, bring it down 1 key. Now that's a note. That's right hand 1 key. Right hand 2 keys. Okay, all well and good. Let's apply this same logic to the other rendition. So the other one started in G, so a little bit higher, okay? Now, we say, all right, let's apply what we did last week, or with the other rendition rather, to this one, which is, instead of adding a C, because this one is anchored on G, I'm going to add a G to everything, with the exception of when I have G and A. When I have G and A, I'm going to go down a key, just like I did with the last song. So far, so good. That sounds a little sour. Now I know I need an A, so that note's is not incorrect. That sounds funny. Now let's analyze this for a second. Why does that sound funny and the other ones sound fine? Well, I'd like you to look at the construction of the keys a little bit, because when I'm in the key of C, what key am I actually going to? I am going to the next white key down, but look, there's no black key in between here. So I'm moving down a half step. This is a half step from C to B. A half step from G is not F. A half step from G is F sharp. Now listen to the difference when I play it with F sharp. I'm just going to turn just a regular piano on. Hear the difference there? So we're adding the F sharp in as opposed to the F because I need to. Remember, last week we said that these two songs are comparable, meaning the distance between all of the keys is the same. Even though the notes themselves are different, the distance between the notes is relative, which is why both of them sound like Michael Rowed the Boat Ashore. The distance between note 1 and note 2 is the same. The distance between note 2 and note 3 is the same. 3 and 4, 4 and 5. That stays the same, which is why the song sounds like Michael. And that pattern that you're hearing is actually what you notice when you recognize a song. It's an unconscious pattern. But when you recognize a song, and we'll just take an instrumental song, because some people might say, I remember the words. Well, how about a song that you're familiar with that doesn't have any words? You recognize this unconscious pattern that the song has. You don't recognize that's a C, that's an A, that's a G. Oh, I know that song. I mean, some people might, but most people say, I hear a note. If the next note is X amount of notes higher or lower, and then the next note is X amount of notes higher or lower, your brain is constantly trying to figure out that pattern. It's just like when you see someone's face, what you're noticing, well, the reason someone is recognizable is that in your brain is burned this pattern of their face. Their nose is in a certain position, it's this big or this small, and their eyebrows look like this, and there's a pattern that we notice. Okay, and that familiarity is that pattern being noticed by our brain. Well, music is the same way. Again, that pattern is unconscious. It's an unconscious pattern that we don't even realize we're doing it. But we're putting together these combinations of notes and we're saying, if this, then this. If I notice this, then this is what it means. And as soon as you start to notice this pattern, you say, oh, I know that pattern. Or you say, I know that song. Okay? Now we can take it a step further and we can say, let's talk about the notes in the scale. Because this is where it gets really interesting. Why the B and the F sharp? Well, the answer is because there is not an F in the G scale, which is what the other rendition is based upon, but there is a B in the C scale. Last week, remember we went over the formula whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half? Well, I didn't get a chance to go over how it sounds so you can see it, but here's... That's C to C, all white keys. What was the key I played here? B. I can go down. Okay, that's a do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Let's say I go from G to G, and I forget about the F sharp here. Do you hear that difference? Okay, there's a mistake there. It needs to sound like this. Again, that's the same pattern, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Okay, so a whole step above the G is an A, a whole step up above the A is a B, a half step above the B is a C, whole step above the C is a D, whole step above the D is an E, half step above the, whole step above the E is the F sharp, and a half step above the F sharp is G. So I'm following the pattern of the key of the song. I know that I said that C is my anchor when the song is in the key of C. What I mean is that the key of C is my anchor. Everything that sounds good is going to be based upon notes of that scale. And the same goes with the G. So if you're one of these students that did this, and everything sounded great, until you got to here, and you're saying, gosh, that just sounds sour. The reason is there's not an F in the key of G. Now, you wouldn't have noticed that if you only played one key because there are not any Fs to be played in that particular rendition. Even in the chords, it was the G chord and the C chord, G, B, D, and then G, C, E, or any other of the two other combinations that you could have decided upon. But when you're adding that extra note, you're great until you get to the A, and as long as you make it an F sharp, it's going to sound absolutely fine. The final element of the review this week was breaking up the pattern of the left hand if you are one of the students that wants to play the left hand in a pattern-based way, therefore creating the rhythm yourself. So if that's your cup of tea, if that's what you're going to do, what I want you to notice here is that there's a difference between what we did with Marianne and what we did here in that with Marianne it was just bass and chord. Bass and chord, bass and chord, bass and chord, over and over and over again. The pattern changes throughout Michael Row the Boat Ashore in the rendition that we have in the key of C. Okay, we can see here that we have a single note at the beginning and then two chords that follow it. Now that right off the bat, that's different. And then we see it again, single note and two chords, and you might be saying to yourself, oh, okay, well, there's the pattern. Couldn't be more wrong, because the next pattern is single note and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 chords. Then we go back to single note and 2, another single note and 2, then another single note and 5. So there is a pattern, single note 2, single note 2, single note 5, and then done again. So that is a pattern-based rhythm. Remember, we said that rhythm is pattern-based, and that is in fact pattern-based. It's just not the same pattern as we played the week before. And that's one thing that you're going to notice is that as you're trying to replicate different styles of music, playing pattern-based chords and bass notes, you'll notice that the patterns change, as they should, because if the patterns were always the same, the songs would all sound the same. That's why you can have a variety of different styles of music written in 4/4 time, known as common time. Last week it was a Latin song. This week it's a ballad. They're both in 4/4. What changed? Well, for those of you playing the left hand, it was the pattern. Now you could have superimposed essentially these choices onto the other one. That was another question that came up. If I wanted to play the other copy more like this one, how would I do it? Well, one thing that I told them to do is just put them next to each other. I even had someone put them one on top of the other and hold them up to a light so they could see the things that were missing and the possible places where they could be. Now that's not always not going to line up exactly correctly, but you can get a fairly good idea as to where a single note would need to go with the other copy or another chord would need to go with the other copy if you used this one as a template. So you wouldn't be just moving things over. Every G chord would be a C here, because one's in the key of G, one's in the key of C. So everything that says a C chord here would be a G chord there. And there would be another chord as well on the other rendition, because there are 3 chords in this one. It's the C, the F, and the G. Well, with the G rendition, it would be a G, it would be a C, okay? Those would be opposites, okay? And then replacing the F chord in this one would be a D chord. And the D chord, you guessed it, has an F sharp. Why? Because the key of G has an F sharp. It's D, F sharp, and A. So those would be the other. We only play that chord twice, but that would be the other chord that you would need to add if you were looking to replicate the arrangement set for the newest rendition with the one that you've had for a while. When we come back, we're going to introduce our new Song of the Week.